And hello, welcome into Market Talk for this Friday, April 15th. Great to have you join us. Thanks for making us part of your day here on this Good Friday. We have a long holiday weekend in front of us. No market trade today, but we thank you still for joining us here and making us part of your day. I'm your host, Jesse Allen. Find us online, markettalkag.com. That's our home on the web. Markettalkag.com is where you can find us. All of our social media links, all of our streaming sources, news of agriculture, and much more. It's all online, markettalkag.com. Well, again, with no markets today, we decide that it's probably a good day to catch up on the weather. And here to help us talk about all that is our good friend Eric Snodgrass with Nutrien Ag Solutions. Eric, good to see you here, sir. Thanks for joining us today on the show. How are things?
Not bad. I could use a good long weekend where we just take a little bit of breather back from this weather pattern and see some family and do some important things. And so it's a good weekend.
Definitely a good weekend ahead with Easter on Sunday and a good family time to catch up with for sure. And especially for our farmers and ranchers, maybe a little time to catch up with the family before the heart of spring planting season is, we haven't quite really started to roll the tractors yet. We have in some southern states, Texas mainly, but, we're going to be looking here to ramp things up the next couple of weeks. But plenty of weather stories to talk about. And I think first we should look backwards to earlier this week, just a massive snowstorm across the northern plains, couple feet of snow in some spots across North Dakota and Montana. Not something you want to see on April 14th, but a good thing in the long run for the drought in that neck of the woods.
Yeah, they'll trade it any day, right? I mean, there's about between 1 and 2 inches of liquid in that snow that's going to melt. So that's great because we still have parts of Montana in the western Dakotas that are in extensive drought. One of the driest starts to any year on record in that part of the western Corn Belt in the northern plains. But yeah, we've not yet kind of blown the lid off on wide open planting, any early planting. And normally folks think, well, that week after Easter is when we're going to be quite aggressive with it. But that big storm system we saw at the end of this past week, still spinning in Ontario today on Friday, it delivered quite a punch, including a bunch of severe weather in the south, which right now we're having the third most active start to a tornado season on record. So it's things are going and going quickly. So the Mid-South wanted all to shut down. The Western Plains said, bring it back to us. And the Northern Plains is like, us too, bring that moisture in because that drought situation is pretty rough in that part of the country.
Very, very true. And we think about the drought. Let's pull up the latest drought monitor and take a peek at this, Eric. And we see those very dry areas down there in the southern plains in Montana. We see some of that drought starting to creep into the western Corn Belt as well. But as you look at this drought monitor heading to Easter weekend, what do you see here? Do you see any improvements? What stands out to you?
Yeah, I'm less worried about the drought that is in parts of Iowa, northern Illinois, and southern Wisconsin. That's been there for a while, but lately there's been quite a bit of precipitation in that area. My biggest concern is what's going on in the high plains, all the way up to Nebraska. I mean, parts of central Nebraska, which didn't get snow out of this last system, they're looking at like 15 to 20% of average snow for the entire winter, which means their long-term drought issues are pretty substantial. And the soil moisture values there are down below 2%, down about 16 inches. So this is pretty deep. We've seen improvement in the lower Mississippi River Valley, but that's come on flooding rains and severe weather. It's also improved in parts of the southeast. California, though, driest start to any year on record. Southern Oregon, similar situation. Nevada, Utah, Arizona. So the moisture they're getting right now is absolutely critical. It's not going to fix the situation, but the jet stream's trying to pile in some mid to late April moisture for that area. But what I'm worried about is, we're halfway through April. If we're going to correct this drought, in the central and southern plains, we've already started to run out of time to do that because once we get through May, it all just turns over to convection. It's storms. Storms are hit or miss by nature. And as a consequence, we're going to probably see that drought area linger, hitting the cotton belt hard wet winter wheat, sorghum, corn, soybeans, all grown in that area. So yeah, I don't like seeing this and knowing that 2/3 of the country is in some stage of drought right now.
Definitely. Well, I'm also going to pull up a couple maps you shared in your Thursday newsletter. And, you mentioned soil moisture, and this is kind of reflective of what we just saw in that drought monitor, kind of the same picture very dry west of the Mississippi, many pockets, and then you start to see some of those very saturated areas in the eastern Corn Belt.
Yeah, so we've not made much progress. Like my home state of Illinois, I just drove across it north, south, and west to east, and you just don't see a lot of guys out scratching fields yet because it's either been too wet, too frequent of precipitation, or it's just been too cold. I don't see soil temperatures staying above 50 Fahrenheit in Illinois, for example, until we get past next weekend. Okay, so this is the weekend after Easter when we do get a warm up that could possibly be coming in. So yeah, you see these soil temperatures staying below that 50-degree mark, and it says don't go aggressive until we start to see better soil. But I know we're all chomping at the bit because, well, we know where commodity prices are right now. You know that better than anybody. And we know that there's a lot of motivation to get in and get going early to possibly avoid some stress later in the season.
Definitely, very true. And I think it's just going to be a matter of what we see the next couple of weeks ahead. I mean, as you look ahead here through the rest of April into May, forecast some of those short-term models. I mean, do we have a good planting window coming up?
Throughout much of the eastern Corn Belt, I don't see it just yet. The farther west you go, it'll probably open up, but you'll get a lot of folks planting into drier conditions because they can, right? And so they'll get in and go after it. But most long range forecasts suggest that through the end of April and possibly even the start of May, we're going to see tighter windows east and versus maybe a bit more open west. Now we get the crop in every year. 2019 was an exception, but we get the crop in. I'm right now trying to assess what I think those first 3 weeks of May are going to look like. I am not seeing major temperature stresses at this point. In other words, I'm not saying, oh, it's just going to have that super late frost event. I don't see it as of yet. But will we get that 10-day stretch where everybody just goes after it aggressively? That hasn't popped out to me yet either.
Well, as we look in farther past that, Eric, summer, we got to think about that too. La Nina, there's still a lot of talk about that. Some
Mhm.
differing models. Some folks think we're going to see a cool, dry Midwest summer, and then some saying La Nina going to stick around. I mean, what are you seeing as we get past planting, get into summer? What are some of the models saying now?
Yeah, I'll be first to admit that I was surprised to see the resurgence of La Nina in March and April. I mean, I thought it would fade. It's done that many times historically, and it's pretty rare for it to build into early spring, but it did. And so now all of the new long range models were initialized with seeing a resurgence of La Nina. So they keep it around. And if they keep the cold water in the equatorial Pacific around, and they keep the cold water off the Baja of California and in the Gulf of Alaska around, which many of the models are doing, that takes the drought risk through the primary corn and soybean belt up to 60%. So 6 and 10 years, we tend to be drier and see drought develop. Now, that still means that 4 and 10 years, that doesn't happen. What I'll be watching carefully from now through April, May, and early June is to see if the ocean temperatures in the Gulf of Alaska moderate. If they warm up, that's one of the first signals to say that maybe the drought risk is farther west. It's over the mountains or it's in the western United States and it's going to stay there. If it doesn't, then our risk increases here. And that's, I think, the biggest concern with folks. So yeah, all the new long range models are out. The ones we run in North America are aggressive on keeping it drier and hotter this summer, right in the central part of the United States and Midwest. So are the Europeans. They're also calling for an active hurricane season again this year, given that there's going to be a La Nina and plenty of warm water in the Atlantic. So it's one of those years where, at this point in April, we look forward to see more downside risk than upside. And until that changes, that's going to be the narrative.
Well, and you mentioned that active hurricane season, and just to dive a little more into that, obviously, if we do see that, we're obviously talking, some major storms possibly for parts of the Gulf and the Southeast, depending on where they're at. But then, what if some of that moisture comes up through the Gulf, and we're going to be seeing wet portions of the Southeast that could impact some planting and some growing seasons there throughout the Tennessee Valley, et cetera.
Yeah, and also, disease pressure too, right?
Hmm.
So, I mean, what we concern ourselves with is that those are what I call the wild cards, right?
Yep.
Think back to, like, what was it, 2018? We started off in Illinois very hot, planted very quickly after a brutally cold April. And then we were like, man, it's getting dry. And then an early season tropical system, I believe its name was Alberto, came right up into the Eastern Corn Belt dumped a bunch of rain, bought us a ton of time in June. I mean, early season. So that's the wild card, right? You could be in drought this year. We could be in drought in the Eastern Corn Belt. And then, I don't know, an August storm system comes up the gut of the Mississippi and erases all the worry, because that can sneak in under a drought. But yeah, I think that this year, I mean, several institutions agree with me that we do have elevated risk. But even if it was going to be a below average hurricane season, it only takes one, right? One
Mm-hmm.
system to undo everything. And that's what we're going to be on the lookout for this year.
How about South America? Let's shift our focus down there. Obviously, we're watching that safrinha corn crop very closely, and just with the tightening world supplies, looking for a decent crop out of there, if not a big crop. But I know models are starting to turn a bit drier. They're starting to see the end of the wet season a little early here. What are you seeing with what's going on with the weather in South America?
Absolutely. So, with the resurgence of La Nina, it's preventing what we call the Madden-Julian oscillation, or MJO, from leaving the Indian Ocean. So, what all that means is that tends to be a signal in South America, on the other side of the world, right, from the Indian Ocean, to just not have a full bore, strong finish to its monsoon season. So, what we saw over the last month was drier in eastern growing areas. So, like Minas Gerais, Bahia, Tocantins, Goiás, and parts of Mato Grosso. That's about 25% of the safrinha crop area. Whereas down south, where they have more of it grown, they were extremely wet. Now, Mato Grosso is the big dog. We talk about that place because it's got more than half of the safrinha crop. Some of it was stressed. I guess what I would say about this is that if the markets were expecting this much out of the safrinha crop, I don't see any reason to see above that, regardless of what we've heard lately from CONAB and the USDA. I think when it comes back to it, they're going to start to see numbers more in line with what market predictions were going into this because of the drought pressures there. Argentina is a bit of a wild card as well. It's been drier in the western growing areas of Argentina, and there's been concern that that's pulled back some of the potential on the later planted crop there. So you talk about global supply, and what I see here is that there wasn't much of a bin busting event coming out of either crop in South America. So if we keep that tight and demand stays where it is, and now there's risk of drought in the United States in summer, I mean, you could add in the narrative about the war and crude oil prices, the strength of the dollar. There seems to be just a lot of things adding up to create volatility over the next several months. So I would just sit back and put the seatbelt on and keep a close eye on all of these things, but weather's certainly playing a big role in it.
Very, very true. Eric, great stuff as always. Any other final thoughts? Anything else we haven't mentioned that we need to keep our eye on here moving forward?
Yeah, I think the thing I would tell folks is let's just be patient. Let's get through April and into May to see what the drought situation looks like. Because I have a saying, and my saying is spring rains can undo all of winter's sins. It only takes a few big storm systems to bring that soil moisture up. And should one of those sneak in, unforecast right now, but sneak in there, get to the Western Plains, get to the Western Corn Belt, now all of a sudden we're talking about a great start to the season. So there's always that wild card that's not easily forecastable, at this particular point in the season. So I'll watch it. I'll watch it for everybody and and keep them posted.
Yeah, and we will look for your latest commentary and everything. I know you send out your daily newsletter in the morning, and the link to sign up for that through Nutrien is on our website as well, markettalkag.com. And Eric, always appreciate the time and the weather insights, sir, and great to catch up with you. And we'll have to talk to you again real soon as we get closer and get more into spring planting. We appreciate it, though. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Have a good Easter weekend.
That's Eric Snodgrass with Nutrien Ag Solutions joining us here today on Market Talk. That's going to do it for the show on this Friday, April 15th. Find us, markettalkag.com. I'm Jesse Allen. Have a great afternoon and a great Easter weekend.